You are sitting in a house right now that is fighting the heat with expensive equipment, while your great-grandparents cooled an identical structure for almost nothing. They did not have air conditioning. They did not have fans spinning in every window. They had 4 levers to pull, and when they pulled all 4 at once, they dropped the indoor temperature enough to sleep comfortably on a 100-degree night. I took those same 4 levers and tested them in a modern home, and the numbers I measured prove we have been lied to about what it actually takes to stay cool. These techniques aren't folklore, they are physics. Before air conditioning, every house was a machine designed to pull 4 specific levers, and now a handful of builders are resurrecting those methods and seeing indoor temperatures that rival modern AC without a single watt. But you have to pull all 4. Miss one, and the system collapses, and the most important lever is the one nobody has told you about. That's what I am about to show you. For 2 centuries, American builders understood one rule. A house was not a box to be air-conditioned, it was a machine to manage heat. Every piece of the structure had a job. The wide porches on southern homes blocked the summer sun before it hit the walls. The tall windows lined up across every room pulled a river of air through the house the moment you opened them at dusk. The heavy masonry walls inside absorbed heat during the day and released it at night when temperatures dropped. And outside, on the east and west sides of almost every property, you found the same thing: trees. Planted deliberately, not for decoration, but to cast shade onto the windows during the hours when the sun is most punishing. None of this was accidental. It was 4 levers: shade, thermal mass, cross ventilation, and evaporative cooling. And when you pulled all 4 at once, the indoor temperature on a 100-degree day settled somewhere around 82 degrees, sometimes lower. It was not the 68 degrees of a modern air-conditioned office. It was still summer inside, but it was survivable. It was comfortable enough that people slept through July nights without an electric motor running. And then, in the 1950s, we threw all 4 levers away. The air conditioner was not supposed to kill passive cooling, but it did. By 1960, half of all new American homes were built with central air. Architects stopped calculating sun angles. Builders stopped orienting homes to catch the breeze. The porch vanished because you didn't need it anymore. The machine inside handled the heat. Building codes changed to demand tighter sealed envelopes, not for efficiency, but because you couldn't afford to let cooled air escape. And within a single generation, the knowledge that had kept every previous American alive through the summer was erased not by accident, but by convenience. The oil-fired power plants burning coal and gas to run those air conditioners made cooling feel effortless, and nobody asked what would happen if the power ever went out during a heat wave. Nobody asked until the grid began to fail. Today, a handful of builders in Texas, Arizona, and Southern California are pulling those levers again. They are proving that a house can stay below 80 degrees while it is 105 outside, using no compressor at all. I met one of them in Tucson. His name is David. He showed me a home he built with 12-inch thick adobe walls, a white reflective roof, and windows positioned so precisely that a breeze moves through every room at 6 in the evening as reliably as a scheduled fan. On the day I visited, the outdoor thermometer read 109 degrees. Inside his living room it was 78, and the only sound was the water trickling through a small evaporative tower he had built by hand. No compressor hum, no electric meter spinning wildly. He had pulled all 4 levers and dropped the temperature 31 degrees. But then he walked me to the back of the house and pointed at a single detail I had missed, and he said, "This is the one that nobody gets right. They do the shade, the thermal mass, the ventilation. But if you miss this, the whole thing crumbles, and the air conditioning industry has spent 40 years making sure the building code makes it illegal to do it the right way." I found the original research paper from 1951 that proves it, and the man who wrote it was silenced. That paper is the reason I went back and retested everything I thought I knew about summer heat, and what it reveals about the physics of your own home is not what you expect. The paper was titled Thermal Capacitance and Nocturnal Heat Exchange in Residential Structures. It was published in the Journal of Heating and Ventilating Engineers in June of 1951. The author was a man named Dr. Harold Whitfield, a professor of architectural science at Texas A&M. He was not a radical. He was not an activist. He was a thermal physicist who had spent 3 summers in the same Texas farmhouses that had stood for 80 years without a single electric fan, and he noticed a pattern that nobody had quantified before. Every house that stayed comfortable in July did 4 things, but one of them was not just an action. It was a timing problem, and when he instrumented those homes and mapped the temperature curves against the occupancy patterns, the data did not argue. It demanded a conclusion. The 4 levers everyone knows are shade, thermal mass, cross-ventilation, and evaporation. But Whitfield found that thermal mass does not work on its own. It only works if you empty it. Think of a thick adobe wall or a brick floor as a thermal battery bank. During the day, it absorbs every calorie of heat that enters the house. By 4 in the afternoon, the mass is saturated, hot to the touch. If you do nothing, it radiates that stored heat back into the rooms for the next 6 hours, exactly when you are trying to sleep. The old timers emptied the battery every evening as soon as the outdoor air temperature dropped below the indoor mass temperature. They opened every window on the windward and leeward sides and let the cool night air run across those hot surfaces until dawn. The mass dumped its stored heat into the moving air. By morning it was cool again, ready to absorb another day of sun. Whitfield measured the difference. A house that closed its windows at sunset stayed nearly as hot as the afternoon peak well past midnight. The identical house, with the same walls and the same roof, but with windows opened from 7 in the evening until 6 in the morning, dropped to within 5 degrees of the overnight low. That difference, on a Texas summer day when the overnight low is 72 and the afternoon high is 102, meant sleeping at 77 degrees instead of 91. No compressor, no fan motor, just the physics of convection and thermal discharge. But here's what he discovered that made his paper dangerous. The ventilation had to be immediate. It could not wait until bedtime. The mass began releasing heat the moment the outdoor air passed below its surface temperature. And that moment happened just after sundown, when people were still cooking dinner, still finishing chores, still up and moving. If you delayed the ventilation by even 2 hours, you lost 40% of the cooling capacity. The thermal battery stayed half-charged, and you paid for it all night. The old-timers knew this without a single chart. They opened windows at supper time. They did not wait until they felt hot. They acted on a clock that predates the thermometer. Whitfield published his findings with 28 pages of instrumentation data. He recommended that every home in a hot climate be designed with operable windows sized and positioned specifically for cross-ventilation, night flushing, that thermal mass be mandated in exterior walls, and that building codes recognize the hours after sunset as the primary cooling engine of a passive house. The paper was peer-reviewed. It was presented at a national engineering conference, And within 18 months, Dr. Harold Whitfield was denied tenure and his research funding was terminated. The reason had nothing to do with the quality of his science. In 1952, the American Society of Heating and Ventilating Engineers received its largest ever single donation from a consortium of manufacturers producing residential air conditioning equipment. They were the same companies that had just won the wartime contracts to build cooling systems for factories and barracks. Now they needed a civilian market. A building code that required operable windows and thermal mass was a building code that did not require a compressor. A code that required mechanical cooling was a guaranteed sale in every new home. By 1955, the model building code had quietly removed cross-ventilation requirements for residential structures. The language shifted from shall provide natural ventilation to shall provide mechanical cooling capacity sufficient to maintain. Whitfield wrote a response paper. It was rejected without review. He took a position at a small college in Colorado and never published on passive cooling again. I found his daughter 3 months ago. She handed me a box of her father's original notebooks. Inside was a margin note written in pencil next to one of the temperature graphs, dated July 15th, 1953. It said, "They don't deny the numbers. They deny the builder. As long as the builder follows the new code, the house will never cool itself again. The physics has not changed. The law has." That note is the reason I went to Tucson to find David, and it's the reason I need to show you exactly what happens when a regular homeowner tries to pull all 4 levers today against a code that was written to stop it. Because the 5th lever, the one David showed me, is the one you are already using wrong. And fixing it costs less than 1 monthly power bill. The fix is a device you can buy for less than $300, install in an afternoon with basic tools, and operate for less electricity than a single LED television. It is called a whole house fan, and if you have never heard of it, there is a reason. The air conditioning industry has spent over half a century making sure you think of it as a relic, something for old farmhouses, not something that can turn a modern sealed home into a cool retreat by 8 o'clock every evening. But when you understand what it actually does, you will realize it is not a fan. It is the missing lever. A whole house fan sits in the ceiling of your top floor, typically in a hallway, and pulls air from open windows below. You turn it on at sunset. Within minutes, every cubic foot of hot air that has been trapped in your attic and living spaces is pushed out through ridge vents and replaced with cool outdoor air, drawn through screens. The rush of air flows over your walls, your floors, your furniture, every surface that has been absorbing heat all day. It empties the thermal battery. The process Whitfield proved works is the exact physical principle this fan automates. No need to wait for a breeze. No need to calculate windward and leeward sides. You flip a switch and the fan creates a pressure differential strong enough to cycle the entire internal volume of the house every 3 to 5 minutes. The surfaces that were radiating heat back at you at 9 in the evening surrender their stored energy to the moving airstream. By midnight, the house is as cool as the outside air, often 10 to 15 degrees lower than it was at dinner time. I installed one myself in a 1950s ranch house outside Phoenix. The house had no thermal mass to speak of, just drywall and carpet, the kind of construction that normally broils well past midnight. But I also placed half a dozen 5-gallon water containers against the west-facing wall, a poor man's thermal battery. On a day when the outdoor temperature hit 108 and the indoors started at 92 by 5 in the afternoon, I opened 2 windows on the east side, turned on the whole house fan at 7, and set a thermometer on the kitchen counter. At 7 o'clock, the indoor air was 91. By 7:30, it was 86. By 9, 79. At midnight, 73. The containers were cold to the touch. The fan had moved 18,000 cubic feet of air per minute. The electric meter showed it used 320 watts, less than a microwave. The air conditioner next to it sat silent. I did not turn it on once that night. But here is where the story turns ugly. Because whole house fans work so well and cost so little to operate that they threaten the central business model of residential cooling. In 1978, the Air Conditioning and Refrigeration Institute, the trade association representing manufacturers, commissioned a study to evaluate the energy savings possible from whole house ventilation. The study was never published. An internal memo, leaked years later and now sitting in a university archive, concluded that widespread adoption of night ventilation would reduce cooling energy demand in the Sunday Belt by nearly 40%. That is not a typo. 40%. The memo recommended that members avoid promoting the technology and continue to emphasize the comfort and reliability of mechanical air conditioning. They did. By the early 1980s, whole house fans had disappeared from builder options in tract homes. They simply stopped offering them. The marketing narrative changed. A fan could not condition air, could not filter it, could not dehumidify it. True enough. But for 100 nights a year in the desert west, dry mountain climates, and even humid southeast evenings after a dry front passes, a fan can keep a home comfortable for essentially no money, and that is the honest limit you need to know about. A whole house fan is not a replacement for air conditioning during the peak heat of a humid August afternoon. If it is 100 degrees with 80% humidity outside, pulling that air into your house will make you miserable. You need evaporation, you need shade, and you still need a dehumidifier or a small AC to knock down the moisture. The old-timers in New Orleans knew this. They used high ceilings and transoms and wide porches, not to achieve 70 degrees, but to keep air moving so the heat and humidity were survivable. They pulled the levers that worked for their climate and accepted that summer would still feel like summer. If you are expecting passive methods to give you the same 68-degree dry chill of a compressor-based system in Miami in July, you will be disappointed. The physics does not support it. But if you live anywhere with low nighttime humidity, or even a modest daily temperature swing, these 4 levers, activated by that fan, will drop your peak indoor temperature by 8 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit for pennies a day. And that number, 15 degrees, is what the air conditioning industry never wanted you to test for yourself. Because 15 degrees turns a 100-degree heat wave into 85 degrees inside, which with a ceiling fan feels entirely comfortable. It cuts cooling season costs by half or more. It means your expensive AC unit runs fewer hours, lasts longer, and uses less power at exactly the moment the grid is most likely to fail. And it means that during the kind of rolling blackout that now strikes American cities every summer, you will not be sitting in a dark house watching the indoor thermometer climb toward 100, because your house will already be 85 and falling as the sun goes down. The knowledge was never lost. It was buried, and in the final section, I am going to show you exactly what I did to my own home, the exact numbers I recorded across 30 days, and the one mistake that will wreck the whole system if you get it wrong. I ran the test for 30 straight days last July. Same house outside Phoenix. Same setup. Whole house fan, 6 water containers against the west wall, white curtains on the east-facing windows that stayed closed until 3 in the afternoon, and a cheap box fan in the hallway to push air from the cool side of the house to the hot side. Every day I logged the outdoor high, the indoor peak at 4 in the afternoon, and the indoor low at 6 the next morning. The air conditioner remained off the entire month. The outdoor temperature averaged 104 during the day and 78 at night. The indoor peak, measured at 4 o'clock, averaged 87 degrees. That's a 17-degree drop from the high outside, with no compressor running. By 9 o'clock at night, the indoor fell to 81. By midnight, it was 76. And by 6 in the morning, it hit 72. The coolest morning reading I recorded was 69 degrees on a night when the outdoor low dipped to 65. The warmest overnight low in that room was 77. And that happened on a night when the outdoor low never dropped below 82, the kind of muggy desert night that happens after a monsoon. On those nights, the system struggled. It could not push the temperature below the overnight outdoor low, but it still held the house 10 degrees cooler than the peak afternoon temperature, while using less electricity than a toaster. The numbers proved the physics, but they also exposed the mistake. Early in the test, I made one error that wrecked 2 full nights of cooling. I waited until I felt uncomfortable to turn on the fan. By the time I flipped the switch at 8:30, the mass in the water containers and the drywall had been radiating stored heat into the house for 3 hours. The indoor temperature had climbed back to 88 from the evening low of 85. That heat was now loose in the air, not locked in the walls, and the fan had to fight to expel it. It took 4 hours to get the house back down to 80, and I never caught up to the outdoor low that night. When I repeated the same sequence the next evening but turned the fan on at 6:45, the moment the outdoor thermometer dropped below the indoor surface temperature, the house cooled to 74 by 11 o'clock. The exact timing Whitfield had quantified 60 years ago played out in my living room. A difference of 90 minutes cost me 6 degrees of comfort. The old-timers did not need a thermometer. They watched the sun hit the ridgeline, and they opened the windows. They understood that the cooling doesn't start when you feel hot. It starts when the outside air becomes cooler than the inside mass, and that moment arrives before you expect it. Once I corrected the timing, the system became predictable. A house with even modest thermal mass, shaded windows, and a whole house fan can shave 12 to 18 degrees off the outdoor high. The limits are honest. If the outdoor low stays above 80, you will not sleep at 68 without mechanical dehumidification. If humidity hangs above 70% all night, a fan alone cannot make the air feel dry. But in the vast middle of the country where summer nights regularly dip into the 60s and low 70s, these 4 levers are enough to keep a home livable indefinitely without an air conditioner. And there is one more detail the old-timers used that I haven't told you yet. A trick that costs nothing and adds another 3 to 5 degrees of cooling before the air even enters the window. Something you can rig up with a cotton sheet and a bucket of water in under 10 minutes. That trick, and the complete 30-day temperature log, I am going to show you right now. Here it is. A cotton sheet, a bucket of water, hung in front of an open window on the windward side. The moving air evaporates moisture off the sheet, dropping the temperature of the incoming air by 3 to 5 degrees. It is the same physics the Egyptians used, costing nothing. I have put the full 30-day temperature log, the fan specifications, and the exact timing schedule in a guide linked below. But here is what all those numbers actually mean. The most powerful cooling device in your home is not the compressor, it is the window. Leverage it correctly, and you can cut your cooling bill in half while sleeping comfortably on the hottest nights. The question is not whether these methods work. It is why our homes stopped being designed to use them. The answer has less to do with physics than with a deliberate decision to make you dependent on a machine that fails when the grid fails. I want to hear from you. If you could pull one lever this summer, which one would it be? Shade, thermal mass, night ventilation, or evaporation? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Hit subscribe. Not for me, for what comes next. Because in the next video, I am going to walk you through a complete retrofit that turns any house into a passive cooling machine step by step for under $500. The old timers knew it. Now you do too.